I guess my question had originally been sort of like, what is the distinction between, I mean, do you even, I personally would probably think that you wouldn't, but maybe you do. Maybe you have a distinction between your poems, quote unquote poems, and performances, but it seems like it's all, but when you said something about the animal, that made me think of that it's all sort of related, and it's related in the sense of like the body, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. And when you're putting this together, I mean, it says that, edited by Rosa, but I'm sure you had something to do with the editing and so on. And what is the distinction, or is there a distinction, or is it arbitrary for what you're calling performances?
The wonderful thing is that it's really impossible to answer, and I suppose that is what keeps me going, because what is the poetry? It's truly a mystery. For example, when I say that I learned it from the animals and that I grew up in a space of silence, this is literally true. I was born in 1948, and I lived in the countryside, and there was only one radio in the house, and this was kept in the kitchen for the maid. So we, the kids, were left in the, playing with the animals, and so there was no TV, there was nothing, So these incredible potentialities of the conversations between the animals was completely present in my life. For example, I remember my mother would say, we had chickens, for example. At one point we had lots of chickens. And so my mother would say, do you hear, my darling? The mother is now telling the little pollito, the chicken, don't eat this because this is dangerous. Do you see? She's saying that. Then she would say, oh no, niñitos, come here. This is the good stuff. This is the good. And I'm like, you see, so my mother had a relationship where she was communicating with all the languages of the animals. So I grew up really in that language. So the rhythms and the condensation of extreme pain, extreme joy, all that is given by the language of the animals. So I related, I suppose, in an animal way to the books that my father had. And I would read ceaselessly, because there was nothing else to do. And I would read and read and read, but I always developed this sort of physical relationship with the text, which was almost like a garden. So, for example, when you ask, what is the distinction between a poem and a performance, I could say something that is relatively true. Like, for example, the performance is something that happens in a collective atmosphere. If you weren't here, I wouldn't say any of that. If I was writing in my room, I would be writing something completely different. And when I read my notebooks, for example, to come up, I want to do a book, I want to do something, and I read my notebooks that are, very, very wild. And how do I discern what is a poem and not a poem? I think I discern that, again, in an animal way. And I want to tell you that, for example, I once heard Jorge Luis Borges. He was already very old and very blind, and he was here in New York speaking at the American Society. And I heard him 2 or 3 times here in New York at the end of his life, and it was so incredibly beautiful. I'm going to tell you first the story I didn't intend to tell you, because I think it's even better and exemplifies this better. This story is at New York University in a big theater, and there was thousands of people waiting for him to appear, and he is late, and he suddenly comes from backstage, and he is blind, so he doesn't know exactly where he is, but he enters, and his body senses the body of those 1,000 people that are in awe of him. So he hears the silence and the awe in the room. And I was very close because I had arrived early, and I could see that his body trembled like a wave. And it was a trembling almost like an orgasm of complete joy. He felt that he was being loved, End of that story. Now we're back in the one I wanted to tell you, which is in the American Society. And somebody asked him, Borges, but how can you tell that a poem is a poem? And he said, when you are in the presence of the poem, it is as when you are in the presence of the sea. There's no question about it. It's an animal response. So I keep my connectivity to that, and in truth, the performance, I think, is more loose, more silly, more stupid, more going nowhere, going every other way, because of the presence of the people. And I love that. And Rosa is really fully, the creation of this book is completely her responsibility, because I was convinced that I would die before anyone seeing an art in what I do, because what I do really passes for nothing. It is nothing. It has always been regarded as nothing. So to have someone see something in the nothingness of it, in its shapelessness of going from one thing into the other and make a 300-page book, that is really her art. And I'm really in awe of the beauty that she has come, not only in the introduction, but in her conceptualization of how this should be presented. So I had as little as possible to do with it.